This is always the hottest topic at Most Powerful Women events, boards. So I'd actually like to start out by asking you, how many people here are on at least one public company board? Okay, not that many. How many of you would like to be on a public company board, or if you're already on one, would like to be on another? Okay, quite a few. And how many of you feel frustrated and a bit confused by how to go about that? Okay, not that many. I mean, I was hearing buzz last night about, I'd like to get on a board and I'm really looking forward to, your panel. So I'd actually like to start out. Now, these three women on stage are what I really like about this panel. I mean, I like many things about this panel, but these are women who are very diverse in their background. I think Nina might have said that, Belen, you are, I'm not sure, I was having a little trouble hearing, but you're a physician by training.
Yes.
And, any woman who sort of defines herself one way and then goes out of her comfort zone somewhere else, I always feel there's a lot to learn from. So thank you for being here. But, Merck Serrano, Merck Healthcare, unrelated to the Merck that is based in the United States, is a German-based pharmaceutical giant. And we're really glad to have you here, Belen. And then Lucy is studied political philosophy in
I use it every day.
Well, and it's
I do.
You say that it makes you more agile, right? A very agile thinker, and so you have a very interesting background for what you do. And then Sophie, who I just met Lucy. I've known Sophie for about 20 years, and she is a French-born lawyer with law degrees from both the US and Europe, and she's been a shareholder rights advocate for, like, how many years?
25 years.
25 years. 25 years. So welcome all. Belen, you are on the L'Oreal and the Banco Bilbao boards. And Lucy is on the Atlantia board, Rome-based Atlantia, and Sophie's dealing with boards all the time. So what is your advice for, first of all, just getting on a board if you want to get on one?
Well, I got on my first board only 4 years ago, after having been in the pharma industry for 25. And obviously, getting on the first board is the most difficult step. And I don't think there is a magic recipe to get on the first board, but as usual, networking and actually using the context that you have as an executive to voice your interest on, getting on board is actually quite important.
So which board did you get on first?
BBVA.
Uh-huh. And how did that come about?
I was recruited by a headhunter, and so I did, and it was the same for L'Oreal a year and a half ago. So, I was talking to different people, and they were all telling me the same thing. Getting on the first is the most difficult step. And there is a second thought that I believe, now looking back, it was very, very important for me, because you have to really make your own choice and do not get too impatient once you are going to get your first assignment, because working on a board is actually time consuming, and selecting your first board is actually going to be super important for you to be able to create value and be successful, but also to pave the way to go to the second board.
Right.
And
so how should you think, Lucy, how should you think about your first board?
Well, it's a great point, because you have to, if you pace out your timeline, I've sat on boards for probably my first about 15 years ago. But when you pace it out a bit, one of the things is you realize, especially if you have a full-time job, you can only sit on 1 or 2 boards. And if you are, in Europe term limits are more prevalent. So say you're on a board for 9 years, which is British best practice. So you realize that you pick a board and you're on that board for 9 years unless you leave early. All of a sudden, you start thinking much more carefully about your time and also your reputation, because it's a little like getting married. You bring your reputation to the table, they bring theirs, and so you pick a board for a company that you're willing to stand up for, because if something goes wrong, you're still standing there. And there's a lot of responsibility. I'm not sure people always realize that with boards there are fiduciary responsibilities, there's reputational responsibilities, there are big time commitments and committee responsibilities. It's not like you get on the board and it's a big party. and so it's like the wedding versus the marriage. You get appointed, and then the real work begins. So I think, and I love boards. I mean, sitting on boards is one of my great joys, because every day is different, every day is interesting. I mean, most of you won't know what Atlantia is, but you'll know what it does, which is Atlantia owns Aeroporti di Roma, which is if you fly into Rome, we own the airports. We acquired those last year. Well, I say we, I'm a non-executive director, so they own it, and that's important because I'm still independent. And they also own all the roadways of Italy, and they have operations in Brazil and Chile and so on. So that's a high-risk business. Things go wrong, and so you've got to love the business and really be willing to spend time and swap spit, so to speak, so that you really are engaged with it.
So, Sophie, last night after the dinner, I saw you sitting in the lobby talking to someone who was interested in getting on a board, and you were giving her advice. So what's your advice for getting on your first board?
I mean, what you were saying was the networks originally. I mean, I think there are really 2 big issues in the backdrop. You have to have a vacancy. Timing is everything. And you can want to get on a board, but you have to be at the right time, the right place, and know the right person. So that creates a mix that's a little bit more complex, for example, in the United States, where board vacancies are very low, versus Europe, where you have quotas that is creating demand. So that, I think that's and term limits in the UK.
So you think that there's much more opportunity in Europe for women to get on their first board than in the United States?
Absolutely. And in fact, when I was in Washington a few years ago, we started this initiative with France in particular, because France adopted quotas, and the quota was 40%. And that, just to give you a sense, the quota was not for the top 100, it was for all companies.
40% women.
Of women. And that created a demand of vacancy level of 7,000 board seats. So overnight, these companies were scrambling. In the US, you're lucky if you get a few hundred a year of vacancies. So I think that's part of the context. So if you're focusing on countries where there's demand, I would focus on countries where you have quotas or you have some kind of public pressure. In the US, the big issue is the vacancy, and I think that's the second topic, is really where the investors are going.
Are vacancies declining in the US?
No.
It's just static.
It's static, and going to your point, the California Treasurer for CalPERS and CalSTRS, the 2 largest pension funds, just came out with a letter back in February of this year, and then went before the SEC with the investor groups, who I work with closely, and they have decided that this year is going to be the board vacancy year. They're going to push for term limits.
Yeah.
It turns out that in the US, you have an overwhelming majority of companies that have directors that have been there for more than 10 years.
30.
Yeah.
30,
but they look at the
yeah.
10-year threshold as best practice.
Would you do anything in your whole life for 30 years besides be married and be a parent? Okay. I mean, seriously, think about it.
So,
there are people who are on boards in Nike and Coke and so
Really?
31, 35 years. I wrote about it a couple years ago. I mean, it's just,
So, yeah, and I
What-
think that's the big
where's the independence? I mean, it's not
Right.
a woman issue, it's a governance issue. The governance issue is, stop telling me that I have to make a case for more women on boards. Make a case to me that anybody should be doing anything for that long. And the standard of 9 years actually is the British standard of 9 years is a good standard. It goes fast.
So I was interviewing Helena Morrissey here last night, and some of you saw it, too. And she's very much against quotas. She started the 30% Club in the UK. She's now expanding that around the world to try and get 30% female representation. That's the target on corporate boards. She's very against quotas. Are you against quotas or for them?
I'm kind of mixed, you know. There are pros and cons. I think with time, I have actually changed my position slightly, and I believe, in particular, for board assignments, having the legislators establishing a target have actually facilitated immensely the access of female to board positions. So, you know, at the same time, this is exactly what Lucy and I were discussing before coming into the panel, is, you know, you don't want to feel that you have been chosen because of, you know, they have to meet a target. So at the end, well, I will not repeat what she told me because it was a bit strong. Can I repeat? Can I quote you?
Why don't I quote myself?
Lucy.
Yeah, you know, but I think this is exactly what I see. It is, you know, this has been an enabler of access,
right.
and we should be aware of that. And then, obviously, is up to us to continue to demonstrate that, you know, we deserve it, and that we create tremendous value, and we are to be kept because of the value we bring.
Yeah, here's the thing. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, we need, you know, I wish we had quotas. None of us, we're all reluctant. On the other hand, is anyone in this room willing to accept what has been written about that says it'll take another generation to have, you know, 30% women on boards if we do it organically? That's ridiculous. And the reason to have women on boards is not because women are so great. It's that, and there's a fundamental politically philosophical difference between the way the US and Europe looks at this. Europe looks at the larger economy and says we need strong businesses. In order to have strong businesses, we need good boards we need strong companies. And in order to have strong companies, we need strong boards. And in order to have strong boards, we need diversity. And that means people cycle off of them. Different people that we haven't seen before sit on them, people with different skills. You cannot have a board made up of entirely Oxford-educated, Eton-educated white men. That just doesn't make for a strong company in any context in France and Germany and else. So when Italy put quotas in place, it actually was very good, not because of just the women, but you ended up with people who had never networked before. No one had bothered to invite them shooting or hunting or golfing or whatever it is men do. Playing pool, I don't know, whatever men do. Sorry. But, you know, no one, because I don't do those things. No one, you know, I just work. Women, we just work, you know. And the other thing is, it's right. It's true, right? I mean, some women golf.
What do you do to have fun?
I let my kid do my hair this morning. That was his fun. He made me look like Dr. Seuss. So, I mean, you know, what I do for fun is I work. I enjoy what I do, and you know, and that's great. I write and I do what I do. But the point is that, you know, put me on I have no hesitation about being put on boards because of a quota. I was put on a board in Italy because it was a quota. I'm also, I think still, we just had a round of new board seats come up, but the only American woman on an Italian public company board, and the only British woman on an Italian public company board. I'm a twofer. You get a twofer with me. And that's not important because I'm a woman. That's important also because you need more international people on Italian boards as well.
Right.
So you get a multitude of things, and because we're a global, Atlantia is a global company.
Yeah.
And they have never made me feel lesser because I was a woman. And if they were trying to, I didn't even notice, because put me on the board because I'm a woman, and keep me because I'm amazing.
Right.
I'm a really good board member. I work hard.
Hey, you made the word.
I did. I left the bleep out.
Sophie, what about you? How do you feel about quotas?
I was reluctant when the French were coming with a quota, but the quotas, actually the business quota succeeded the political quota. It was actually a movement in France and actually across Europe, but movement to get more women in politics. And the only way to get the women in politics was to force the men to have women get elected. So once the social acceptance, they saw women as parliament mayors and ministers, and we even had a French presidential candidate who was a woman in the second round. They decided to go towards women on boards. And I was really reluctant because I knew the culture of these French companies. In the past, I used to run a hedge fund, an activist hedge fund. So I met a lot of CEOs. And the reality is quite different. And I think if France did not, and I believe Germany, and you have really good experience with Germany, but France, Germany, and Italy did not have quotas, we still would have no women on boards. No. So that's number one. What the second thing was that we noticed, and I saw this in France, because I get a number of calls from companies asking if I know anyone, a woman, because I'm a woman, who would sit on a board. And originally they were just looking for women. When you get to 40%, you're not looking for women, you're looking for talent. Mm-hmm. You're looking for someone who's going to support you, support the management in terms of oversight, offer you skill sets that you don't have on the board, and protect you. This third thing, and I say this as an investor, you know that boards can be targeted and individual directors can be targeted. And in a takeover situation, independent directors generally, particularly in the hostile takeover, they will go with the investor base. So you really want someone who's going to be skilled. And so the first wave of women in France were not necessarily, I don't want to say this, but the most adapted. Mm-hmm. They were women. The second wave were highly qualified.
That's so
and I've noticed this with, and we're only talking a few years, mm-hmm. With headhunters in particular have told me throughout Europe, the one thing that's happened, number one, the process is more professional, mm-hmm. whereas before they just call their friends. Number two, they actually have board director reviews. In the past, they never reviewed directors. But to get rid of the women who weren't the right ones, they had to create a process. Turns out it's not just the women being kicked off the board.
Exactly.
So that's the primary change. So I think it's actually a very good thing.
Yeah. I mean, when you show me as many mediocre women on boards as there are mediocre men on boards, then I'll feel like we've reached somewhere.
And board
because the women,
that's equity, right?
Yeah, exactly. Then we've reached somewhere. I mean, the women.
But this is also true for executive.
Of all kinds, exactly. I mean, the women that I know who are sitting on boards, God, they work hard. They work. You know, we are at. I never miss a meeting. If I miss, I'm on the phone. We work hard. And not all of them. I mean, again, women, there are lots of different kinds of women. But once we reach parity in mediocrity, I will be happy. When I see a woman fall asleep in a boardroom, like I've seen men fall asleep in boardrooms.
Who has a question?
There's somebody.
Yes, please identify yourself.
Donna Roach-Terry, CT Partners, Board Services. This is taking it the next step, and that's around the separation of CEO and chairman, which I think in the UK works extremely well. It also opens up opportunities for women to move into chairman. Again, that's the next step. And I'll quote Val Gooding here, because she was one of the first chairmen here in London. And she said it was a cement block to go from a board member to a chairman. So it's not a glass ceiling, it's a cement block. Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little bit about the separation of CEO and chairman in North America, and then also just your views on that?
I have very strong views. I believe very strongly in the separation of chairman and CEO as a governance principle. I think it's very important. I think the checks and balances, I mean, for all kinds of, I've written about it ad nauseum, but the checks and balances is very important. You know, and someone once said, how can you tell the difference between when there's a chairman and when there's a lead director? So when you have chairman, CEO together, then you'll have sometimes a lead director. And the way you can tell the difference is if you become chairman, people send you flowers and candy and chocolates and so on. If you become lead director, nobody calls and nobody writes, nobody cares. So there's an acknowledgement that there is a difference. And I think it's, as a governance principle, it's very important. In Italy, there are several companies that have the state has a stake in the company. And so Renzi, when he did a whole move of, you know, because everybody comes up every 3 years, so the entire board renews every 3 years. And so the chair of Eni, which is one of the largest energy companies in the world, a woman now. The chairwoman of Posta, naturally, chairwoman of Posta Italiana, which is about to go public in October, I think, a woman, and it will be the 5th largest public company in Italy, I believe. Huh. There are several others. So I see the correlation, but also just as a governance principle, I'm a strong believer in separation.
In the US, I mean, it's mixed, and we just saw recently, particularly in certain sectors, the merger going back to the chair and CEO. I mean, honestly, I actually believe the governance reflects the culture of the company, and the box-ticking approach is not necessarily the best one. So in some situations, chair and CEO is a good thing, and in other situations, it's not. If you're a public company and you've got a very controlling shareholder and the shareholder is also a CEO, it might be a good thing to have an independent chair. Then you've got countries that have, like in Germany, you have a two-tier board. So that's another, you already have another separation level. And I've also noticed in the US with lead directors, this is a big trend, particularly on the investor side, is directors are now more engaged directly with investors. And more they're being put into rooms speaking to the large institutional investors, which requires a level of sophistication in markets that is not given to anyone, to be candid, male or female for that matter. But I do believe that depending on how you define the lead director, depending on what that mission of the lead director is, it's a very powerful tool to engage and for the board to get information going up. But you're right, it's a way to increase the pool. I just want to make 2 points on the quotas. The primary thing that happened with the surge in demand was the contraction of supply. There's just not enough supply. So what happened for a lot of the European countries, with the exception of Norway, which I would say is the counterexample, what happened was a globalization of boards. Right. And I just want to point this out because in the United States, you probably have the most local boards in the world. You have global operations, you have global management, and you have very local boards. So if you're looking at all these companies around in Europe, you're seeing their operations are global, their management is slowly becoming more global with the exception of L'Oreal's and big companies like that, but their boards are global. And I think their boards are going to be more effective in the long term, and American companies, a lot of them are failing in international expansion. That might be a reason.
I think this is a great point, if I can comment on that, but I don't think this is only applicable to boards. I think in a way, I don't know whether this is the consequence of the executive profiles and the culture of the US-based companies, because at least in the sector in which I have been working for 25 years, you see that when you look at the talent pool of those US-based companies, the majority of the resources will be US, not US-based, but US-based wherever. And you know, there is a fundamental dilemma today in our executive world in which for US-based companies, even European-based companies, the majority of the growth will emerge from growth markets, Asia, LATAM, etc. And there is a fundamental disconnect between the pool, the talent pool, and what is driving a strategic growth. So, and, you know, in a way, to me, when I heard you talking, I think that we have to address that.
Yes.
Because if we focus on addressing that fundamental disconnect between your strategic growth and how are you going to deploy your resources and your talent pool, and we improve on the executive side, we will, as a consequence, improve the non-executive world as well.
We have to wrap up, and I have to ask one very quick question about activism. Where are we and where are we going? And I'm going to give you each 15 seconds to comment on that. Sophie?
So shareholder activism in the US in particular and Europe increasingly is going to grow. I expect the next proxy season to have board diversity as one of the top issues.
Okay.
I agree.
Lucy?
I mean, it's definitely growing, and it's not all bad. I mean, one of the problems is that boards and advisors to boards, accounting firms and so on, are advising companies from a defensive posture, but actually boards need to be much more introspective and think, what should we be doing and what can the company be doing, and use it as an opportunity, because it's sometimes hard to create change in a company, but actually sometimes that pressure can be very effective in creating change. You should never let a good crisis go to waste.
Ellen?
Well, I think we have to stay very focused on what we have been doing to date, you know, and the real challenge is to continue to provide access to women for senior leadership positions. So we have to continue to be focused on diversity and inclusion. I mean, this is not exhausted, and we are half the way. So bang, bang, bang.
Activism, activism.
This is a competitive advantage, and this is the way we have to really incorporate this to our company's strategies.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. This was terrific. Thank you. I'm staying on stage for the next session.